Why would a group of young people kill to the order of one man? How does a warped ideology become one of the most dismal episodes in the history? This is the tale of Charles Manson and the killings that disturbed the conscience of the world. Those that are so vicious that they blighted America eternally. This has started way back in the late 60s, when people were having an impression that the world is turning in either directions at the same time. On the one hand, there was promise and liberty. U.S. youth was protesting to war, celebrating peace and love, experimenting with music, drugs, and lifestyle. On the other hand, it was discontent, breached trust, and confusion. It was being left behind by the conventional system by many. There was broken families, doubted institutions, and rebellion. This was an ideal setting where one like Charles Manson could get a chance to step in. Manson was not new to law. He had been in and out of prison most of his early years due to petty crimes, theft, and other fraud. In jail, he studied people. He was introduced to the power of manipulation, how to seek out weakness, and how to use words to his advantage in order to control other people. Upon his release in the late 1960s, he bore with him an unsatiated desire, not to reform, but to rule. He started to gather youthful adherents, a large part of them women, who had left home or sought fulfillment in the counterculture. They had been disillusioned with society, wanted love, they wanted more direction, something bigger than themselves. Manson offered this to them, at least superficially. He provided them a welcome, narcotics, and a place of belonging. They soon started referring to him as their leader, and what was later to be known as the family was initiated. Family life was both free and controlling. In fact, they lived collectively, shared all they had, and denied the normal society. However, there was more going on behind the scene of peace and love as Manson was spinning a web of control. He used music, drugs, and manipulation to persuade his disciples that the end of the world was coming, and he was a prophet and was destined to lead them through this gloom. He predicted that a race war was looming soon, a bloody conflict between blacks and whites that he called Helter Skelter after the Beatles tune. This war would kill what people had known as a society, and as soon as it was finished, the family would emerge out of cover and take on the world. It was an illusion, and he who believed it, his followers. They clung to his utterances as sacred and were ready to do anything which he ordered. Manson was impatient, but he did not want to wait till the world could collapse itself. He desired to accelerate it. He thought that an act of terror and violence would cause the sparks that will bring the same out, and therewith wrote the order which changed history forever. At night on August 8, 1969, Manson summoned some of his most from-scratch committed supporters and sent them to a Los Angeles house. His guidance was intimidating to kill all inside. The target of this house was actress Sharon Tate, who was wife of film director Roman Polanski. Sharon was 8 months pregnant with a baby, and during this evening she was with friends. She could never have imagined that just a few moments later, the doors would be broken open by strangers with knives and guns. Once the members of family got in the house, one of the most brutal massacres was witnessed in the history of America. Sharon Tate and 4 others, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent, were brutally murdered. Sharon pleaded to save the life of the unborn child, but her plea was met with deaf ears. Her murder outraged the nation, not only solely because of her celebrity and purity, but because of the senselessness of the murder. The horror was not over there yet. The very following night, the followers of Manson attacked once again. The victims this time included Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, a wealthy couple in Los Angeles. They were bound and were tortured and murdered in their residence. Words were composed in blood messages painted on the walls to cause fear and uncertainty. It was not talking about murders, but a kind of message to scare. The news on the killings went viral. People were afraid to go out of their houses and even kept the doors locked as they feared more victims. It had the same dread on celebrities, politicians, and ordinary families. What made the crimes worse was to discover that the killers were not hardcore criminals, but simple-looking men and women. They smiled and laughed and showed no regrets. The question everybody wanted to know the answer to was very simple but very chilling. How can it happen? Initially, law enforcers were at pains to relate the killings. The killings of Tate and that of LaBianca were considered a coincidence. Nothing connected the Manson family. However, early on through confessions and with the help of evidence and testimonies, the skeins began to shake loose. Everything came back to a single man, Charles Manson. He had never drawn a blade, never squeezed a trigger, yet he was as guilty as those who executed the deeds through his voice, his commands, and his management of his family. A trial that ensued was one of the most infamous in the American history. Manson was theatrical in court and carved an X on his forehead, which he later developed to a swastika mark, the symbol of his disobedience. His disciples, who were also on trial, showed cult-like adenosine. They sang, they laughed, and they spoke of Manson like he was a savior. People were aghast at the trial where his power and the gullibility of his followers were shown. Charles Manson and some of his followers were convicted of murder and death sentences in the year 1971. When temporarily the state of California reprieved the death penalty, they changed their sentences to life imprisonment. Sometimes throughout decades, Manson would sit in prison, a walking, breathing example of the horror. His interviews chilled the general public, talking in riddles, laughing about the questions, and never at any moment showing remorse. He ended up as the incarnation of evil that could be and was interesting yet repulsive. The Manson murder story goes beyond crime. It is the tale of manipulation, the vulnerability of humans who wanted to fit, and, most importantly, the misplaced belief in the ability to delegate judgment to somebody beyond themselves. Manson was not rich, he did not hold a position in the government, and he did not have anything more than ordinary achievements. However, he was capable of persuading other people to reject morality, kill the innocent people, and devote their lives to his distorted ideology. It makes a cold reminder that the most sinister force may often be playing the least expected. The Manson murders remain to this day a key event in American history. Their existence was symbolic as it signaled the end of the boom-free attitude of the 1960s, destroying the concept of peace and love that had characterized the decade. The death of Sharon Tate, that was in particular, was used as an example of lost innocence and a bright life taken too early. Roman Polanski ended up in shambles, and to this day, 21 years later, people still talk of her name in sorrow. The crimes also caused unanswered questions. How did common folk, ordinary young women and men who had potential on their side to turn into willing killers? How could Manson control their minds like that? Put in plain English. And worst of all, perhaps, could it happen again? The deaths that surrounded the Manson killings also teach us that not every evil comes on a platter of violence. It sounds like many times it comes softly, wrapped in love, belonging, or a sense of a greater purpose. It begets growth under isolation, nurtured by fear and manipulation, and then can eventually go on a rampage. Charles Manson desired disorder. Instead, he gave us a legacy of horror and a lesson which has been ringing through our ears ever since. It was in the midst of this confusion and uprising that a man like Charles Manson was able to emerge. So as we salute the memories of the casualties, the broken families, and the scars left behind, we must answer the following question. Could our world today protect us against someone like Manson in the event of a similar rebellious atmosphere? In a time of influence, voices reach further than ever. And how can we guard against leading down the wrong path by following the voices of dangerous leaders? And even more to the point, how readily might ordinary people, even now, be coerced to walk in darkness once again?